buddy?
Well, Barry, I am well, and I've got a lot of phone calls this morning, as you can imagine. So, it's unfortunate, but kind of the reality that when things potentially go south for people, the phone lines of law firms get a little bit more action.
Yeah. I got Dad on the line. He wants to ask you, Stu. He wants to ask you. First of all, Stu, tell us what you're doing. I know you're an attorney there in Atlanta. I know you've represented a lot of coaches there. The Yahoo article, federal documents detail sweeping potential NCAA violations involving high-profile players in schools. You're quoted all in the article. Obviously, Pat Forty and Pete Thamel lean on you for your expertise. Just kind of tell everybody what you do there, Stu, before we get Dad ask the first question.
Yeah, well, Barry, Coach, for the past 18 years, I've been a lawyer who pretty much focuses on college athletics issues, which include representing both student athletes and coaches and university institutions in NCAA compliance matters, and also doing coaches' contracts, both from the school and coach's point of view, both when they sign up originally and then when they get released, and then doing some of the business aspects of college sports, which, media rights and, sponsorships and those kind of things. But I've appeared before the NCAA Committee on Infractions about a dozen times now, and that's the bulk of my business. I will say before I got into this, as Barry, I was fortunate to be able to coach college basketball at the Division I level for a number of years, including probably my favorite and most successful year was 94-95 with the Alabama Crimson Tide, which was Jason Caffey and Antonio McDyess and Roy Rogers and Eric Washington and Marvin Orange in that group that won the first game in the NCAA tournament and then got beat by Big Country Reeves and Randy Rutherford at Oklahoma State.
Yeah, so he goes, well, all right, Dad, fire it.
Well, I recruited about 3 of those guys. I wasn't around, but I recruited Roy Rogers and Jason Caffey for sure.
Coach, you recruited a lot of good ones. Yeah.
What I want to ask you is that now that these names have come out publicly, there's been some debate as to whether these guys would be eligible to play in the NCAA, or whether this would be announced prior to the NCAA, or would stuff be wait and be announced later. 2 questions. One is the 3 coaches, Chuck Persons certainly, those guys have got a deeper, tougher, and they're going to be penalties come down probably on those 3 coaches or 4 coaches eventually. That's the first question, because everybody's wanting to say that Auburn doesn't have any problems, which is not right. And secondly, the names that have been called today, will they continue to play for their schools the rest of the year?
Well, let me take those in order. First, Coach, I think the people who have been named as targets of the FBI Southern District of New York investigation, and those who have been indicted and or arraigned, they have a variety of potential problems. Probably the most significant for them are the criminal aspects. Again, I think it's important that everybody is presumed innocent until the process plays out. But from an NCAA point of view, for those individuals in their schools, what is significant is that in almost every one of those cases, a student athlete has been withheld from competition and a coach has been put on leave or had their employment terminated. And what that signals is of high likelihood that the schools in their initial internal reviews have found enough potential NCAA violations that they've had to take that action. So anytime you have student athletes who sit out a long period of time, that does indicate a high likelihood of significant NCAA violations. Now, what the penalties from an NCAA point of view will be for those kids or those coaches who may be involved or those schools is yet to be determined, and we shouldn't speculate too much. But it is true what you said, that even if a coach or a booster or a player commits a violation, those violations get assigned back to the particular school. They are institutional violations as well as individual violations, and therefore it is certainly possible, and I would say probable, that the schools where you've already seen significant employment action and significant withholding of student athletes are going to face some sort of additional NCAA consequence at some point down the road, but we just don't know enough information publicly about who did what or how significant it was to really guess at the extent of those institutional violations at this point, whether those will be something as minor perhaps as some limits on official visits and recruiting, or whether they could be as major as vacating games or a postseason ban. We just don't know. Now,
okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
In terms of your second question, the names that have just come out today, for example, are now going through the same process that those previously mentioned schools had to go through. And whether or not student athletes, we're old school, I call them players, whether or not the players at those schools will have to be withheld and no longer participate in conference play or conference tournament or an NCAA tournament is going to depend on what kind of investigation the schools can do pretty quickly in the next few weeks. Because if the schools, under NCAA rules, if the schools have reason to believe, credible reason to believe that an NCAA violation occurred, then the schools are supposed to declare the student athlete ineligible and withhold them from competition until they go through something called the student athlete reinstatement process. The problem is it's really hard for the schools to do a quick investigation or to know how much credibility to put into the information that is now kind of dribbed and grabbed out through media leaks, because the school investigators don't have access to what the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office know. And they probably don't have access to interview people. So I could see a wide variety of outcomes based on how they assess credibility and also kind of the amounts involved. A school may be more willing to continue to play a kid if there's a not very substantiated allegation involving $200 or $300, as opposed to the same, maybe still unsubstantiated allegation, but involving $10,000 or $12,000.
All right, if you've got a kid, your team's going to the NCAA tournament. You're almost positive, but you've got a team with a kid that's been named. You don't want to lose that money going to the NCAA tournament because you're going to make a pile of money by going regardless of make some money. Are you not better off not playing that kid so that you can go ahead to because you know you're going whether the kid plays or not?
I'm going to give you a typically weaselly lawyer answer, which is that each situation has to be judged on its own and based on the available information. Certainly, the safest thing for the school to do is to withhold the kid until they can do some initial investigation, which would be interviewing the kid's parents, asking the NCAA if they have any information, trying to call the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office to see if they will provide any information, which they almost certainly will not at this point, and then trying to make this judgment of, at this moment, does it seem likely that a violation occurred?
Okay.
Certainly the school would be smart to go through very quickly that due diligence process, and maybe in that process, as a precaution, withhold a kid from a game or two while that is going on. But it may be, Coach, that at the end of that process, the school concludes, hey, we've done our due diligence. And based on what information is available now, there simply is not enough credible evidence that a violation actually occurred, so we are going to choose not to withhold the kid. And as long as the school did all that research, there's a good chance that even if later on more evidence came out that showed the kid should have been ineligible, that the NCAA will give the school some credit and not vacate games. Again, this is all some speculation, but that the school would get some credit because the school is not obligated to withhold a kid until there is reasonable, credible evidence that a violation occurred. Because although you want to protect the school, the flip side of the coin is that if you withhold a young man, or in other cases, a young woman, from competition, and then it turns out that you didn't need to, they can never get that, what's called the student-athlete experience back. So I don't know what conclusion each school will come to. That's a case-by-case basis, but certainly every school who's got somebody involved in this, I suspect, will be scrambling today to do at least basic due diligence and document to the NCAA that they're doing that kind of investigation.
We're talking with Stu Brown, attorney in Atlanta who handles players, coaches, contracts. Stu, let me ask you, Collin Sexton, obviously, we're here in Tuscaloosa. There's a lot of people. He's already kind of gone through this. He was ruled ineligible. I think he missed one game, so I'm sure their compliance officers did whatever they had to do. His name is back in this article, and it may just be that he had a meal with some agents, and I think who paid for the meal is critical there. But do you think Alabama, do they reopen this, or are they already gone down this road with Collin Sexton based on what happened prior to the season and him being ruled ineligible for the first game?
They probably have to reopen it at least a little bit, and ask some questions about what has now been put forth in the media. How much additional research or investigation they have to do really depends on how thorough the initial investigation was, and whether or not in that initial investigation there were specific questions about agent interaction. So my suspicion is that they will do follow-up interviews with the young man, his family, maybe high school AAU coaches, whomever they can contact, but that if they're satisfied with the initial investigation answers, and these are similar, then that's when they'll make that value judgment about is what little we know really sufficient to change our mind and cross that threshold of probable NCAA violation that requires withholding. Because I also think it's important to caution that as these things come out in the media, we in the public really don't know the context. We don't know the explanation. We don't know who entered this stuff in the spreadsheet. We don't know what they said about why they entered it. We don't know the full scope of this, and we're just seeing, like looking through a straw. We just have a little pinhole idea at this point. And while these issues certainly look serious and are serious from the NCAA point of view, people in the public need to not put too many carts before too many horses in terms of reaching any conclusion about any particular case for any particular kid or school.
Let me ask you this about Dennis Smith. It's showing here he got 43,000 up to $73,000. Well, Mark Gottfried, obviously a friend of all ours, was a coach at NC State then. Is he obligated to speak to the NCAA or the FBI? I guess he are the FBI. What does he have to do there if they come to talk to him about what he knew about Dennis Smith?
So you're talking about whether Coach Gottfried is obligated?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Under NCAA rules, there's the NCAA legalistic answer, and then there's the practical everyday answer. The legalistic answer is NCAA rules require both current and former coaches and student athletes to cooperate in NCAA investigations pursuant to NCAA bylaw Article 19. So from an NCAA point of view, they will expect Coach Gottfried to cooperate fully, even though maybe at the time they interview him, he's no longer an NCAA coach. From a real-world point of view, you see this with sometimes former coaches or former players who are now, for example, playing in the NBA or whose just college career is over. At that point, even though the NCAA says you're obligated to interview with us, those people may say, look, I'm never going to be involved in anything having to do with the NCAA ever again. I just don't want to be bothered by it. I refuse to interview. And in those cases, there's not much that NCAA can do about it. Now, two other factors that often occur with recently former coaches are these. One, sometimes that coach's most recent school is still paying the coach out over time. And if the coach is still getting payments from that school and decides not to cooperate with the NCAA, the school might be able to use that non-cooperation as a basis for cutting off continuing payments. That's a factor. And the second factor there is, does the coach want to get back into coaching? If so, they certainly want to be and appear to be cooperative with the NCAA. And then the third and maybe the most important factor is a coach's desire, if they really don't know anything about the situation or didn't have any involvement, is to be cooperative and clear their name. So those are all the factors that would go in place for a coach like Coach Gottfried, although, again, I would caution that if for whatever reason he would choose not to at least immediately talk with the NCAA, that does not necessarily mean he is, quote, hiding something, unquote. I think sometimes in the public we get, well, the coach is not talking to the NCAA, they must have something to hide. Well, again, that's not always true. There may be other reasons that they just simply don't want to be bothered with a process that they feel they no longer have anything to do with.
Yeah, well, Stu, that's great stuff, man. And it's just the timing of this thing and everything with the NCAA tournament right around the corners. Just it could just really blow up college basketball, to be honest with you. So,
Stu, I ought to fire Barry if not having you on before doing all this other stuff.
Now, Stu, here's the thing. If you bill us for this time that we've had you on, send that. Do you need Dad's address to send him the bill to?
What I want is some of that good catered food you were talking about earlier.
Some taco casa? Yeah, we get that for you.
Unfortunately, a lot of times I get paid in gear, gift in kind, and it's like, Coach will say, I need a little advice. I really can't pay, but can I send you some sweatpants? And, they send me the sweatpants that were designed to fit a guy who's about 6'11", 260.
I tell you what we'll do.
One of those good tacos would be much better.
I tell you what we'll do. I'm going to send you a wimp mask, Stu. How about that? You
want a wimp mask? Don't send no wimp mask. No, he don't want no wimp mask.
Stu, I appreciate you being
Thanks,
on
Stu.
with us.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Stu.
You're welcome, gentlemen. Have a good day.